Welcome to Unlike Minded, a sci-fi audio anthology.
We Who Hunger by Oriana Schwindt. It was a relief to be outside. How long had it been for Mina since she'd been able to go outside and simply walk, unhurried, with no destination in mind, no fear of what awaited her upon her return? Years. 4 years of her precious 20s. Looking after Nana had been the only thing to do, of course. How easy it had been for Mina to tell Adult Protective Services that Nana would be staying in her house and Mina would take care of everything for as long as necessary until the bitter end. 4 years and a very bitter end indeed. Mina blinked away tears as she pictured her grandmother in those last days, furious, slavering, emaciated. Mina hoped everyone around her was too busy enjoying the day to notice. Now what? Mina found herself paralyzed by choice. She could do anything, but anything she were to do meant necessarily that she was not doing other things. And so the slow narrowing of her life once again was inevitable. What would she give to know that such a narrowing didn't matter? That perhaps there would be some years where the cumulative decisions she'd made, a sandwich here, a relationship there, would trap her in some hopefully metaphorical room, but that those years were immaterial, that she in fact had all of the years in existence to change her circumstances whenever it suited her. She felt a pang of hunger at that thought, hunger for life everlasting, undiminished. All the years in existence was the phrase Mina kept repeating to herself as she looked with no small trepidation at the hulking cement dome in front of her. The job posting had appeared in her inbox as if by divine providence. Wanted. Seekers of Eternity, it started. It meandered a bit in the way a freshman's Philosophy 101 final paper would. But as Mina could suss out, a man who'd made his fortune in tech was looking for an assistant who could help him achieve his true aim, immortality. Mina sweated and cried over her application, fabricating skills, registering new phone numbers, and practicing other voices to serve as references. In the end, that had all been for naught. That was the man. That was his name, at least these days. Had called her personally and told Mina she'd gotten the job simply based on the story she told in her essay about caring for her grandmother. There was nothing else needed. She was aware this was probably a scam. Mina had seen plenty of those before and even been a victim. But there had been something in Dis's voice that told her he at least was utterly sincere in his pursuit of life without end. And now she was here, squinting in the glare of the rising sun, standing in the middle of a sea of asphalt, the parking lot of a dead office park that had once been a novelty. Giant half spheres of concrete instead of squat squares, created by a developer who'd taken a trip to Mongolia and become obsessed with living in the round. The dome in front of her had no windows. Mina couldn't see a bell to ring. She was just about to knock when a voice floated down from above the heavy vault-like door. "Please don't trouble your knuckles." The door swung open. The man leading Mina deeper into the dome had introduced himself as Michelangelo. But besides that, and "please follow me," he had said nothing else, not even when Mina tactfully declared the brutalist touches in the space to be lovely. The silence pulsed in Mina's ears. "Have I said something wrong?" Mina asked. "Certain speech sounds cause the nasolabial folds to deepen," Michelangelo said. "Every unnecessary word adds years to your face." "Oh, sure." Mina Mina studied his face, sneaking glances as often as she fell short of the creepy threshold. How old was he? She could see no trace of lines on his face, but deep hollows beneath his cheekbones suggested at least a handful of decades. They didn't speak again until they reached the kitchen, a rather small space with 2 burners and an industrial blender. Your first duty will be preparing our supplemental nutrition, Michelangelo said. The program has ascertained that physical ingestion of nutrients is optimal only between 6:17 a.m. and 11:04 a.m. Mina noted the time was currently 11:37 a.m. Her stomach rumbled. We do not consume anything other than water outside of these hours, he added. He pried open the lid of a large barrel, revealing an uncomfortable number of lentils. The recipe was on the back of the lid. Boil lentils until soft, blend with olive oil, extra virgin, and a dash of salt. We consume 3 bowls during ingestion hours, Michelangelo said. Dis sometimes adds fruit or garlic to his, so be sure that that's on the table before you go about your other duties. When do I get to meet him? Mina asked. Not yet. Mina caught herself giving a customer service smile and dropped the corners of her mouth. She stood carefully just inside the threshold, safe in the cool dimness. UV radiation is the root cause of cellular degeneration. He handed her an ID. Oklahoma. He had turned 18 just yesterday. Please, she said to the gangly young man standing in the bright sunlight outside the dome. Follow me. The young man stumbled as he entered the dark building, but it had been weeks since Mina arrived, and already she couldn't bear the brightness outside. She led him through the concrete maze, sure-footed. Does it hurt? He asked, barely above a whisper. Does what hurt? What they do in there? Mina couldn't answer. She left him in the waiting room. Waiting for what? It's not that it hadn't occurred to her to ask. There just hadn't been time. Wake at 4 a.m., hydration, prepare meals, light mask, consumption, exercise, the constant collecting and analysis of data, nearly every moment of the day spent accounting for every moment. There was never enough sleep, even trying to force herself to try to get to sleep no later than 8:30 p.m. as her stomach growled, still unused to Mina's new diet. And none of the other fresh 18-year-olds who'd been whisked into the mysterious waiting room had asked any questions. They'd emerge looking a bit tired, but none worse for whatever happened to them, and Mina would show them out. Enough of them returned that she assumed they were willing, if not eager. The young Okie, Jonathan Harker, a name that embedded itself into her memory, was pale and troubled when he stepped out of the room. Mina resisted the urge to ask him how he felt, what had happened. Later, she knocked gently on the door of Michelangelo's room. I think it's time for you to tell me what these people are actually showing up to do and why I'm checking their IDs, she said upon entering. Michelangelo fixed her with a searching gaze. It is imperative that the volunteers be of age to legally consent to medical procedures, he said. The program demands that they also be no older than 18 years and 7 months. That is why you check their IDs. What medical procedures? In vivo transfusion, among others. Mina's mouth opened, but nothing came out. How old would you say I am? Michelangelo asked. Not sure. 30, 35? I'm 43, he said with a smug smile. Mina felt a physical pang, her longing for all those extra years taking hold of her stomach. When can I start getting transfusions? A faint glow emanated from Dis's taut skin. Mina thought he'd been carved from moonstone. No wrinkles, no pores, just starkly white, waxy skin stretched over a face that had clearly been carved by scalpel and steroids. Mina had seen the before pictures. The after was fascinating, though some part of her understood that he had become a grotesque. Mina comforted that part of her by insisting she would not need to go so far. After all, she was starting the program a full 20 years before him. Dis didn't smile. Not even his eyes crinkled. But his voice was warm. "We're pleased to have you here," he said mildly. Michelangelo had been in such desperate need of help, but it was difficult to find anyone who met the criteria. "I'm excited to be a part of this," Mina said. "Ah," Dis said, his voice less warm. "Excitement. Michelangelo?" "Extreme emotional states flood the body with destructive hormones. Our daily meditation practices help us achieve a state of constant equanimity." "I understand," Mina said, trying on the flat affect of the other two. "Michelangelo says you would like to move to the next level of the program." "I'm ready." "We'll see," Dis said. The day came sooner than she'd expected. Unexpected, too, was the young man half reclining on a cushioned chair. It was Jonathan. Mina placed herself in the chair next to him at a gesture from Michelangelo. "Does it hurt?" she asked. Jonathan blushed. "Just a little." "Shh," said Michelangelo, and Jonathan's eyes darted away from hers as Michelangelo began inserting tubes into his arms, feeding them through a large machine. He did the same to Mina, and the in vivo transfusion began. No pain, instead nausea. Mina understood now why Jonathan had looked away. She averted her own eyes from the sight of the young man tethered to her by lines of blood. For a moment, she considered telling Michelangelo to stop, to let Jonathan go, that this was not, in fact, what she wanted. She spared a glance at Michelangelo, busying himself at a computer terminal. Lustrous skin and hair, the very picture of health. She told herself Jonathan was being paid handsomely for this service, had agreed readily, if not enthusiastically. Having his own blood supply replaced by Mina wouldn't hurt him. She conjured up the image of Nana, snarling and soiled, and told herself, "Not me." And oh, the life that Mina felt afterward. 18 felt so long ago that she scarcely thought of it. But now, body full of young, hot blood pumping fiercely, Mina wondered if she had truly been alive at all since then. The moon was full that night, a brilliantly warm harvest moon that beckoned at Mina from the small windows in the kitchen. She hadn't stepped outside the dome since she arrived. Surely the UV radiation was small enough that it wouldn't damage her. Plus, she had been restored, renewed. The young blood singing in her veins clamored for the outside world. Mina found herself dancing through the hallways to the front door. She tried to pull it open. The door felt as though it wanted to, but had been forbidden from opening. Mina pulled harder. Nothing. Harder still, with no luck. She only just managed to stop herself from screaming in sudden frustration. There had to be a key somewhere. Her first instinct was to search Michelangelo's room. It was after 9:30, and Michelangelo slept so deeply that Mina had to resist the urge to start singing just to see if he'd even wake. She found nothing there. Dis slept vertically, his nude body strapped to a single massive wood plank harvested from a sequoia tree that had been proven to be 2,133 years old. The plank had not been sanded down or otherwise processed because, as Dis had explained when he showed it to Mina the other day, the naturally preserving compounds in the wood must be free to make their way into my body. Michelangelo removed the splinters every morning. Mina spotted a key fob resting on a stand next to Dis. She quietly crept to the stand and grabbed the fob. Just as she was about to go, though, she saw it. A heavy steel door directly across from Dis's vertical bed. Mina had been so absorbed by the sleeping setup she hadn't really noticed it before. The impetuous blood surging through Mina urged her to try the key fob on it, shouted down the more responsible voice in her head that said, "No, you idiot. There's no way that won't make a noise that wakes him up." Suspended briefly in the argument of her body, she was jolted out of it when the sleeping Dis tried to roll over and, finding himself restrained, let out a disapproving moan. Mina crept out slowly, terrified now of any noise her bare feet might make on the concrete floor. She took nearly an entire minute to close the bedroom door after she'd left, moving so slowly a snail could have raced through. She tried the key fob on the front door and pulled. Nothing. Sandy eyes and a stomach so hollow Mina feared it would suck her body inside out through itself. The intoxicating effects of the transfusion had worn off, and Mina resentfully set to work boiling several pounds of lentils at 4:30 in the morning. She thought nothing of Jonathan Harker, the 18-year-old Okie, only the substance in his veins, and so many others, that would make her feel that way again. Michelangelo's brow came as close to furrowing as Mina had seen it. "You tried to leave the dome," he said, voice dripping with disappointment. "Only Dis's handprint can open the exterior doors after curfew." "I didn't know there was a curfew," Mina said, defensive. "I figured the UV radiation was low enough that it wouldn't mess anything up." Michelangelo sighed. "I don't know if she's a good fit," he said. Dis's voice emanated from a speaker in the ceiling. "I'll be the judge of that." She was to present herself in the medical bay, ASAP. In the medical bay, Dis gestured Mina toward one of those chairs that fit more in a dental office than a home. "How is your meditation practice coming along?" Mina placed herself in the chair and thought guiltily of the previous night, how she'd raged and cursed both of the men and bruised her hands pounding on the impassive front door. She settled on, "It's a challenge sometimes." Her stomach roared, furious. Dis busied himself with preparing several syringes. To fill the silence, Mina continued, "I just think I need a little more time to adjust to the program, maybe get out for a walk when the moon starts waning, eat something in the afternoon for a few weeks." "We've cultivated our own strain of Clostridium botulinum," Dis said, waving a syringe towards a lab fridge stacked with vials. "So we can have fresh, homemade, organic botulinum toxin." Mina couldn't decide if Dis had not heard her or had heard her but simply didn't care to respond. "That's neat," she said. Before she could say anything else, Dis stuck two of the needles into her face. "This will help with the adjustment." Dis held up a mirror. Mina tried to furrow her brow and couldn't. Her eyes failed to widen in surprise. "You don't look a day older than 30, Dis said, and that's the oldest you'll ever look now." Instead of telling him she was 27, Mina asked when she could get her next transfusion. When she wasn't thinking of delicious, fresh salads dripping with dressing or a perfectly cooked steak, Mina found herself staring at her reflection, wishing she could peer 20, 30, even 50 years into the future to see the same visage staring back at her. Dis assured her, 7 months into the program now, that her body had recovered at least 5 years, and, scientifically, could be said to be no more than 22. She resented the days between transfusions. The physical sensation of hunger had abated at least. Just a few hours ago, a girl from Macon, Georgia, had taken Mina's blood this time and given her own every last drop. This time, Mina was ready. She collected Dis's handprint, a pristine sample from a glass bowl. There was a harvest moon tonight, and Mina's entire body was consumed with the idea of dancing under its orange rays. She walked by Dis's room and, out of some unnameable instinct, peeked in. He wasn't strapped to his bed. She chewed her lip. The moon was waiting. She had not left the dome since her arrival 217 days ago. But the opportunity could not be denied. She used the handprint to open the heavy steel door, which swung open with a surprising lack of noise. Mina stepped into the adjoining room and flinched when she triggered a motion-activated overhead light. Had she been able to move the muscles in her face that widened one's eyes or wrinkle one's nose, she would have done both. As it was, the only physical reaction left to Mina was to drop her mouth open. A child, no, a baby, perhaps 18 months, sat in a padded high chair, multiple red tubes springing from its torso. One of the tubes fed into a glass jar. Another brought blood from a bag back into the body. The baby's eyelids fluttered, but it was otherwise still, slumped slightly, held in a seated position by the straps of the chair. "My body requires younger blood," Dis said from behind her. Mina gasped and leapt away. "Yours will as well as time goes on, but I've accounted for that in your personalized program." Speech had deserted Mina. Dis stepped closer to her. "You're very beautiful," he said. "I noticed that right away from your application. Young, beautiful, devoted. Together we can sow the seeds of our own immortality. Children whose life force can be harvested." He was inches away now, the breath from his words full of iron. Many were the days taking care of Nana that Mina felt as though she had exited her own body and was keeping watch. On one of these days, Nana had confused Mina for a much-loathed sister and attempted to take a belt to her. The force of Dis's kiss, an iron tongue jamming itself into her mouth and bringing with it the taste of sickly sweet decay, knocked herself out of her own body. She hung there for a moment, watching herself accept the kiss. She saw clearly now the future. All the years in existence spent under a concrete dome, trapped with a man who saw her as merely another tool for his program. All the years in existence, subsisting on the blood of her own helpless children. As she came back to herself, her stomach twisted, not from hunger or fear, but disgust. For the first time in months, she thought of Jonathan Harker. Her escape was all too simple in the end. Upon re-entering her body, Mina played the awestruck bride-to-be. The next day, during Dis's 3-hour afternoon run, she applied a layer of fresh, homemade, organic botulinum toxin to the sequoia plank he slept on, then drizzled some over the next day's lentils just to be sure. Acquiring another handprint had been easy enough. Around midnight, she stole one last time into Dis's bedroom. She opened the heavy steel door, detubed the baby as gently as she could, and carried it with her out the door. The poor thing didn't have enough energy to make more fuss than a whimper. Dis's eyes opened at the sound, staring intently at Mina. She felt rather than saw the rage and betrayal. Not only was Dis's face smooth and waxy as ever, but now his body was immobilized. She made her way swiftly out of the dome. Mina paused behind the wheel of the car she'd driven here what felt like a geologic age ago, unsure of what to do next. In her lap, the baby lifted its head and cooed with delight. Mina followed its gaze and did what she could to smile as she turned the ignition on. The moon was just on the wane, but it was bright enough. For now.
This has been Unlike Minded, a sci-fi audio anthology. Collection 3, Monster Mash. Stories about creatures, chaos, and the supernatural. We Who Hunger was written by Oriana Schwindt and narrated by Lilah Richcreek Estrada. Unlike Minded is an August year-round production, created, produced, and edited by Robbie Hyne. We'd like to give a special thank you to everyone who has supported this independent podcast production. You can keep up to date and find more info about this podcast and others on Instagram at the handle AugustYearRoundProd, or email us at augustyearround@gmail.com. And be sure to subscribe, leave a rating and review, and tune in next week for another episode of Unlike Minded. Thank you for listening.